She was soaked in rain, clutching her silent daughter at a stranger's grave. She didn't ask for help, she didn't cry, and when he offered his hand, she looked at him with eyes that said one thing: don't be temporary. What followed was not just kindness, it was a quiet battle to rebuild a life the world tried to erase. If you are new to the channel, then please subscribe to the channel, like the video, and tell us where you are watching from. Now let's jump into the story. The rain had been falling for hours, soft but steady. The kind of rain that didn't soak all at once, but crept in slowly, soaking through collars and sleeves until it was impossible to ignore. Jonas Merrill stood just beyond the old stone gate of Greenville Cemetery, his umbrella forgotten in the trunk of his car. He didn't plan to stay long, he never did, but something today felt different. His shoes pressed into the wet gravel as he walked the narrow path. Rows of worn headstones lining either side, the smell of damp earth and fading flowers in the air. Jonas had visited this place many times since Daniel passed, sometimes to remember, sometimes just to feel something at all. Guilt made the visits more frequent than grief. Daniel had been his best friend once, the kind who laughed too loud and forgave too easy. But life had drifted them apart before death made the silence permanent. He turned the corner, expecting to see nothing but the familiar stone engraved with Daniel's name. Instead, he stopped, heart slowing, breath catching. There, sitting on the grass right in front of the grave, was a woman. Her clothes clung to her frame from the rain. Her dark hair stuck to her cheeks. In her arms was a little girl, no more than 5, pressed tight against her chest. Both were soaked. Silent, unmoving, the woman didn't cry, didn't speak, didn't pray. She just stared at the name on the stone like it owed her something it could never give. Jonas hesitated, unsure whether to leave or speak. He hadn't expected company, especially not someone like her. The child's eyes were closed, her lips parted in sleep, her small hand curled near her mother's collar. She looked like she hadn't rested properly in days. He took a cautious step closer, then stopped. The woman looked up at him, her gaze steady but unreadable. She said nothing, just turned her eyes back to the grave. Her silence wasn't cold, it was tired, like she'd spoken all the words that mattered long ago, and now had nothing left to explain. Jonas didn't know why he spoke. Maybe it was the rain, maybe the weight of his own regret, maybe something in the way she held the child so carefully, so quietly, reminded him of something he'd forgotten. "Do you have somewhere to go?" he asked, the words slipping out before he could stop them. She didn't answer right away, just looked at him again, longer this time, as if measuring whether he meant it, not the question, but the care behind it. Then she turned back toward the headstone and whispered, "No," just one word, small and simple. But Jonas felt it land with the weight of something deeper. She wasn't asking for help. She wasn't begging. She was simply telling the truth. And somehow that made it even harder to walk away. Minutes passed, maybe more. The rain softened. The wind stilled. But neither of them moved. Finally, Jonas said, "I knew him," his voice low, not wanting to disturb whatever space this moment had become. "Daniel," he added, though it felt silly to say the name aloud. Of course she knew who lay beneath the stone. The woman nodded faintly. "He talked about you," she said, her voice steady but quiet. Jonas blinked, surprised and a little ashamed. He had wondered if Daniel had spoken of him before things had unraveled. Now he knew, and it hurt more than he expected. "Was he?" Jonas paused, unsure how to ask. "Were you?" He didn't finish. The woman shifted slightly, adjusting the sleeping child in her arms. "I'm Collie," she said. "This is Ella." Jonas let the name settle in the air, soft and human, in a place made for the gone. He knelt slowly, his suit absorbing the damp from the ground. He didn't care. He wanted to be closer. Not above them, not distant. "She's beautiful," he said, glancing at the little girl's face. Collie gave the faintest nod, her arms holding Ella tighter. Not in fear, but in the quiet way people hold on to what matters when they've lost too much. "We don't need anything," she said firmly, not defensively, just with finality. Like someone used to turning down offers that came with conditions, Jonas didn't argue, he only offered his hand. Open and still, no pressure, no words. Kali looked at it, hesitated, then shifted Ella to one arm and reached out, her fingers brushed his, light but steady. She didn't grip, didn't flinch, but her eyes met his. And something in them spoke louder than anything else. A question, unspoken but clear. Will you mean it? And somehow Jonas did. He nodded once. Not with certainty but with something close to it. He wouldn't walk away, not this time. Kali rose. Slowly, holding Ella close, her clothes soaked, her hair still dripping. But she didn't ask for help, and Jonas didn't let go. They stood there for another long moment in front of the grave, saying nothing. Just breathing in the same space, bound by something they couldn't name yet. Then they turned, together, walking away from the grave, from silence, from the past. That had broken too many things. Ella stirred in her sleep, her head resting against her mother's shoulder, and Jonas stayed close beside them. Not guiding, not leading, just there. He didn't look back at the grave, he didn't need to. The choice had already been made, not in words, not in promises. But in that simple moment when she took his hand and didn't let go, Jonas hadn't prepared his apartment for guests. It had always been more museum than home. All white walls, perfect furniture, glass tables no one used, everything spotless. And untouched, like he'd been waiting for a life that never arrived. Now it felt like the wrong kind of place to bring Kali and Ella, but it was the only place he had when they walked in. The air was too quiet, the lights too bright. Jonas stepped aside, letting them enter first. Kali didn't say anything. Didn't take off her coat. She stood just inside the doorway with her hand still gripping her bag. As if someone might tell her to leave any second, Ella clung to her mother's leg, her eyes wide, darting from corner to corner, the tip of her shoe tracing little circles on the floor. She didn't speak, didn't even smile, but she looked curious. In that quiet way children do when they're trying to decide if a place is safe. Jonas realized then how unused his home was to company. The silence wasn't peaceful. It was heavy, awkward, cold. He offered them water. Kali nodded once. Still not meeting his eyes, he brought back a bottle, not a glass. Not because he meant to be rude, but because he didn't know how to be warm yet. She took it. No thanks, no words, just a nod, not out of pride, but out of habit. Jonas could feel it. She had learned not to thank people for kindness that might disappear. Ella sat on the very edge of the couch, not sinking into it, just perching like it might vanish if she got too comfortable. Jonas tried to sit across from them, his body stiff, his hands folding and unfolding in his lap. He wanted to say something, anything, but the words felt clumsy in his throat. What do you say to someone who's lived more loss in 1 year than you have in a lifetime? He didn't eat. No one asked. No one offered. It wasn't hunger that filled the room. It was caution. Tension sat on the coffee table like a third guest. Watching, listening, waiting. Finally, Kali stood, walked to the kitchen, rummaged in her bag, pulled out a pack of crackers, handed 2 to Ella, then returned to her seat. Jonas said, "I have food," but she shook her head. "We're fine." Her first full sentence since stepping inside. And it wasn't angry, it wasn't cold, it was just final. She'd drawn a line in the air, and he didn't cross, I didn't push. He sat back, picked up his phone, stared at a screen that didn't mean anything. He was thinking about Daniel. Again, wondering how long Kali and Ella had been drifting, where they had slept, what they had lost. Hours moved slowly. The room didn't soften, it just stayed still. Ella eventually curled beside her mother on the couch, not sleeping, just resting, one hand gripping the fabric of Kali's coat. Jonas turned off the big light and switched on a small lamp. The glow helped a little, but not enough. Kali remained upright, not leaning back, her bag still at her side like a shield. Jonas stood once to grab a towel for her coat, but she declined it, just nodded like she appreciated the thought, but couldn't accept the gesture. Later, when he returned from checking emails again, he noticed something new on the corner of the coffee table. A napkin, crumpled slightly, drawn on in red, uneven lines. A child's drawing, a sun, a crooked house. 3 stick figures, one taller, one with curly hair, one holding a balloon. He stared at it, frozen. It felt like it didn't belong here. Not in his clean, perfect space. And yet, it was the only thing that felt real. He picked it up, turned it over, no words. Just that bright red image in a room full of dull silence. He wasn't sure why. But he walked to the trash can and dropped it in. Almost immediately, Kali stood and followed. She reached in, pulled the napkin out, wiped it gently with a tissue, then threw both away. No explanation. No glance toward him, just donaciones. Felt something twist inside him. Not guilt, not shame, something else, like loss. Like he'd just thrown away something more than a napkin. He watched her return to the couch, settle beside Ella, arms crossed. Expression blank, but underneath, he could feel the edges of something deeper. The apartment felt different now. Not cleaner, not dirtier, just off. Like something sacred had been there and was now gone. The drawing hadn't been art. It had been life. Messy, honest, present, and Jonas realized he missed it already, didn't say it. Not out loud, he wasn't ready. But he knew, deep in his chest, that something had shifted. This space, this life, wasn't supposed to be untouched anymore. Not if it meant being alone. Ella stirred, her small hand reaching up to her mother's face, and Kali leaned into it, just a little. Just enough to show that beneath all the quiet and all the fear, there was still love, still warmth, waiting to be allowed to grow again. Jonas sat quietly, staring at the empty corner of the table where the drawing had been, and wondered, not for the first time, what it would take to make them believe this could be more than just another stop on a long road of nowhere. And in that quiet, surrounded by silence, for the first time since Daniel's funeral, Jonas began to feel something almost like hope. The school office smelled like old books and pencil shavings, the kind of place that should have felt ordinary. But Kali's shoulders were already tense as she stood beside Jonas at the enrollment desk. The woman behind the counter gave a polite smile, typing something into her computer. Then she asked for the usual documents. Proof of address, medical records, birth certificate. Kali didn't move. Jonas felt her silence before he saw it. Her hands clenched around the strap of her bag, her voice low and even when she said, "We don't have it." The school secretary blinked, clearly confused. "You lost it?" she asked gently. Kali shook her head. "No hospital, no paperwork. She was born in an apartment." Jonas felt the words hit him before they finished leaving her mouth. He stepped in quickly, trying to ease the tension. "We'll handle it," he said, pulling her gently away from the counter before any more questions came. Outside, the sun felt too bright, the air too sharp. Turned to Kali by the car, his voice quieter than usual. "What did you mean, no paperwork?" Kali didn't look at him. She stared at the sidewalk. "She was born at home. We didn't go to the hospital. There was no one to sign anything. No one who cared to." Her voice didn't shake, but it didn't need to. It was steady in the way a person speaks when they've told this story before and stopped expecting understanding. Ganes didn't know what to say. For once, his wealth, his connections, none of it could rewrite what had already been lived. But that night, he stood in his kitchen, holding his phone tightly, then finally made the call. "I need help," he told his lawyer. "There's a little girl, her name's Ella. She needs to exist." He didn't need to explain further. The lawyer only said, "Send me what you have." Jonas spent hours gathering everything. Dates, old addresses, receipts from a free clinic. Anything that could help build a trail backward. When he laid it all out on the table, it looked like scraps of a life someone had tried to erase. When Kali walked in and saw the folders, she paused. "What is all this?" she asked. Jonas didn't look up. "We're filing a delayed birth registration," he said. "For Ella." Kali stared at the stack of papers, her arms folded tight across her chest. "That's a lot of work for something that can't undo the past." Jonas didn't argue. He just said softly, "She deserves a place in the system. She deserves to be seen." Collie watched him carefully, like she wanted to believe him, but couldn't let herself hope yet. Finally she sat down, her fingers resting near a pen, not picking it up. Not yet. Jonas passed her the first form. You'll have to swear it under penalty of perjury, he said. You okay with that? Collie gave a short nod. I've got nothing left to lie about. They spent the next hour filling out page after page. Some sections remained blank. Others filled in with memory rather than proof, and where the documents asked for a doctor's name or hospital code, Collie simply wrote, none, not out of shame, just out of truth. When they finished, the table looked like a small archive, but to Jonas, it looked like victory, slow, small, but real. Then Collie stood, walked into the other room, and came back with Ella in her arms. The child held a stuffed rabbit by its ear. Her eyes half closed from sleep. Callie knelt beside her daughter, picked up a pen, and placed it in Ella's hand, guiding her gently. Try your name, she whispered. Jonas held his breath as the girl slowly moved the pen across the form. Her letters uneven, wobbly, but they formed something real. UN. It was imperfect, but it was hers, Collie whispered. There, now it's yours. The paper didn't change shape, but the moment did. It became something permanent, something sacred. Jonas looked at the letters again and felt a pull in his chest, stronger than anything business or duty had ever made him feel. This wasn't about charity. It wasn't even about regret anymore. It was about making sure no one else could ignore her again next morning. As Jonas stood at the kitchen counter, reviewing everything one last time, a knock came at the door. It wasn't loud, but something in it felt official. Collie looked up from folding laundry, her face already tight. Jonas opened the door and found a woman standing there with a clipboard and cautious eyes. Mr. Merrill, she asked. I'm with Child Protective Services. We received an anonymous concern. Collie stepped into the hallway before Jonas could answer, her expression unreadable, not scared, just flat, like someone who had stood in this position before and knew exactly how fast everything could fall. A Parth woman looked at Ella, who had wandered into the hallway in her socks, her thumb near her mouth. Does this child live here? She asked, her pen already moving. Jonas didn't pause. She lives with me, he said. With us, he added, softer. Are you her guardian? The woman asked. Her tone clipped. Jonas nodded. In process, forms filed. He didn't explain, didn't hesitate. He gave the name of his lawyer, the name of the school. Contact. He gave her everything except a reason to doubt him. The woman took her notes, gave a warning about follow-ups, then left. The door clicked shut behind her like a gavel in a quiet courtroom. Collie stood in the hallway, her arms wrapped around herself. Why did you say that? She asked, not accusing, just tired. Jonas looked at her, then at Ella. Because it's true, he said. You live here, she lives here. That's all that matters. Collie didn't reply right away. She turned toward the kitchen and grabbed a glass of water. Her hands shook just slightly as she drank. Ella sat in the living room with her rabbit, and slowly, she climbed onto the couch beside Jonas. She didn't say anything, just leaned her head against his arm like it had always been her spot. Jonas stayed still, not daring to move, not even when the clock ticked louder than his thoughts. And in that moment, surrounded by silence, he finally understood what it meant to be chosen by a child who had never known stability for the first time. He felt like he belonged. Jonas wasn't expecting to see it when he opened the fridge. He was just reaching for a bottle of water, when his eyes landed on a piece of paper taped to the bottom of the door. It was slightly crooked, crinkled at the edges, drawn with bold red crayon. A house with a pointed roof, windows that didn't quite match, and 3 stick figures standing. In front, one tall, one small with pigtails, and one in the middle wearing what looked like a tie beneath it. In big uneven letters were the words, "Our Home." He stared at it, hand frozen halfway to the shelf. The drawing wasn't neat. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. It was loud in its honesty, louder than any conversation he'd had in weeks. It didn't ask permission to exist. It just declared itself a moment later. Collie walked into the kitchen and froze when she saw where he was looking. Her face tensed, not in fear, but in embarrassment. She moved quickly toward the fridge, reaching for the drawing. She puts them everywhere, she said under her breath. It doesn't mean anything. Jonas raised a hand gently, stopping her without touching. Leave it, he said softly, not asking, not unsure. Just certainly looked at him, then at the paper, then back again, her arms crossed now, guarding herself the way she always did when things felt too kind. She draws where she feels safe, she murmured, almost like it wasn't meant to be said out loud. Jonas nodded slowly. Then it should stay. They stood there in silence, the hum of the fridge filling the space between them. Collie leaned slightly against the counter, her voice quieter now. She's never called anywhere home, she said. Not really. Not even when we had walls and doors. Jonas didn't interrupt. She kept talking, her tone flat but full of memory. We moved too much. I never let her decorate, never unpacked more than we had to. I told her not to get attached, just in case we had to leave again. Her words landed like soft rain, each one sinking deep. Jonas looked back at the drawing, then at her. But she did, he said. She got attached here. Collie didn't smile, but something in her shoulders softened, like a weight was shifting, even if it hadn't left completely. No one ever stayed, she whispered. Not really. Jonas stepped forward, not fast, not close enough to crowd her. Just enough for his voice to land where it needed to. I'm still here, he said. Simple and quiet. Callie didn't answer, not with words. But she didn't walk away. Thorella entered the kitchen with a sheet of stickers in her hand and mismatched socks on her feet. She stopped when she saw them standing there, then looked up at the fridge. That's our house, she said with a proud little nod. That's me, that's Mama, and that's you. She pointed at the stick figure with the tie. You wear ties, she said like it explained everything. Then she turned and walked out again, humming a soft tune only children now. Jonas and Collie stayed still, the drawing now heavier with meaning than it had been a minute ago, not because it changed, but because it didn't have to. It had already said everything. Lee didn't take it down. Later that evening, while tidying the guest room, Collie found a box tucked behind old files. It wasn't labeled, just taped shut like someone had meant to forget it. When she opened it, she found letters, all handwritten, addressed to Jonas. None sent, each one signed by Danielle. Weren't angry letters. Not all of them. Some were messy, some sad, some tired, all of them honest. She didn't read them fully, didn't need to. She just closed the lid gently and placed the box on the dining table. When Jonas came home, he saw it, opened it, and sat down slowly, each page pulled out like a thread unraveling something deep. He read until the room darkened, until his chest ached in a way that had nothing to do with loss and everything to do with truth. Collie didn't ask him to explain. She just sat beside him, silent, steady, letting him be broken without fixing him. And in that silence, Jonas finally faced the pieces of himself he'd spent years avoiding. Didn't speak about the letters again. They didn't have to. A few days later, as life returned to a quiet rhythm, another knock came, not on the door, but on his understanding of what this all meant. Collie stood in the kitchen doorway, her hands tucked behind her back, her eyes clear. I'm pregnant, she said, no hesitation, no fear, just truth. Jonas didn't move at first, didn't speak either. He looked at her for a long moment, then glanced toward the living room where Ella was coloring on the floor, crayons scattered everywhere like confetti. Then he looked back at Collie and said, this one's ours from the start. No big reaction, no speech, just a statement that meant everything. Lee let out a breath she'd been holding for weeks. She didn't smile, but she stepped a little closer, and that was enough. He didn't talk about names, or nurseries, or how things would work. They didn't need to. Everything important had already been said, not in words, but in actions, in presence. In that drawing still taped to the fridge, a child's vision of home before anyone had dared to call it that. Jonas had once lived in silence because it felt safe. Now he lived in noise, because it felt like life. And as the night settled in, and the sounds of crayons rolling across the floor echoed through the hall, Jonas knew he didn't. Just open a door that rainy day at the cemetery opened his heart, and this time, he wasn't closing it again.